The year was 1888, and the echoes of war thundered across the American West. The frontier was ablaze with conflict as Union soldiers and Native American warriors clashed in a battle that would determine the fate of the land. In the heart of the Dakota Territory, an isolated military outpost, Fort Trinity, stood as the last stronghold in a relentless campaign. Here, a small battalion of weary Union cavalrymen, led by Captain James Calloway, prepared for what they knew would be their final stand. Surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of time, they braced for an enemy they could not hope to defeat. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The wind howled through the wooden palisades of Fort Trinity. Snow had begun to fall, covering the ground in a thin white sheet, though it did little to mask the blood that had already been spilled. Captain James Calloway stood atop the lookout tower, scanning the horizon with cold, steel-gray eyes. He could see them, hundreds of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, their war paint blending with the darkened sky. They had laid siege to the fort for days, and now, under the cover of night, the final assault would come. Beside him, Lieutenant Thomas Mercer, a young officer barely 22, shifted uneasily. "Captain, if reinforcements were coming, they would have been here by now." Calloway sighed, his breath visible in the freezing air. "There are no reinforcements, Lieutenant. This fight is ours alone." Below, soldiers murmured prayers and wrote their last letters home. Some sharpened their bayonets, others checked their rifles. They knew what was coming. Chapter 2. The First Shot. A silence fell over the battlefield. Then, a single war cry pierced the night. The Lakota warriors surged forward, a wave of mounted fighters, their horses kicking up snow as they thundered toward the fort. Arrows rained down, embedding into the wooden walls. "Hold the line," Calloway roared. "Fire." The fort exploded with gunfire. Winchester rifles cracked, and bullets tore through the enemy ranks. Lakota warriors fell, but they kept coming, their determination unshaken. A group of Cheyenne braves scaled the walls, clashing with soldiers in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Blades flashed, gun stocks cracked skulls, and blood mixed with the snow. Chapter 3. A Desperate Struggle. Inside the fort, the battle turned into a bloody melee. Calloway drew his saber, cutting down a Lakota warrior who had broken through the gates. He turned just in time to see Mercer struggling against an enemy twice his size. The warrior swung a tomahawk. Mercer barely dodged. Calloway thrust his blade, piercing the warrior's side. Mercer gasped, looking at Calloway with gratitude. "Stay alive, Lieutenant," Calloway muttered before turning back to the fight. The soldiers were being pushed back, forced into the center of the fort. Ammunition was running low. It was only a matter of time. Chapter 4. The Last Stand. As dawn broke, Fort Trinity was a smoking ruin. Half of Calloway's men lay dead. The rest were wounded or out of ammunition. The enemy surrounded them, waiting for the final push. Calloway knew there was only one way this ended. He turned to his men, his voice steady. "We fight to the last. We fight for each other." The soldiers, though exhausted, nodded. They knew their fate, but they would not surrender. With a final battle cry, they charged. Chapter 5. The Cost of War. The battle raged for only minutes, but it felt like eternity. Calloway fought like a man possessed, his saber flashing in the sunlight. Mercer was struck down beside him, his young face frozen in surprise. One by one, the soldiers fell. Holloway, wounded, dropped to his knees as the last of his men perished. As the enemy warriors approached, he closed his eyes. He had fought well. When the dust settled, Fort Trinity was no more. But the legend of its last stand would live forever.